What's mad about erasing evil from human hearts? Well, I don't expect a filthy demon to understand it.
What about free will?
That's enough, scum!
There is an upcoming 3-hour documentary about the history of first-person shooters, complete with a Blu-ray release. And it's not hard to see why. They generally have a history as rich and interesting as any other entertainment medium. Since the genre's birth, every 1 to 4 years, a new FPS came out whose twist on the formula made it part of pop culture at least, and at most created a whole new subgenre. Even the names of these subgenres are interestingly diverse from a semantic point of view. Doom clones is a fairly neutral term from when they did not think an FPS could be different from Doom, a phenomenon that actually came true with Souls-likes. Boomer shooter is the word for modern Doom clones, which has a positive connotation, but it was created by a child, and the adults are somehow going along with it. Still better than the I word used to describe games like Deus Ex. At least for me, there is poetic justice when the term is so vague that the Steam tag is being attached to FIFA, among many other things. Oh, how I imagine a world where the popular term would have been the much more descriptive emergent gameplay. Anyway, Half-Likes is a clever term, but it's not mainstream. Call of Duty clones were called the Spangargle Wee Wee by Zero Punctuation, and it stuck for a bit. Borderlands clones have a neutral term, looter shooters, but they deserve a derogatory one at this point. And the most interesting one is games that are like Halo, which are called Halo Killers. It's a title with negative connotation, as if Halo is an oppressive dictator that needs to be taken off its throne. And I'm truly baffled by its existence. Where does it come from? The most obvious source would be Killzone, but it was never advertised as such. It's probably due to the tabloidization in the media and forums, since Halo was on Xbox and Killzone on PS2, but the only similarity is that they're both sci-fi. Killzone plays more like Medal of Honor. On the other hand, Resistance Fall of Man, another PS exclusive, is way more similar in gameplay and setting to Halo, yet you don't really see it referred as a Halo killer. The most baffling one is Haze. Haze and Halo Killer go hand in hand wherever you search, yet they don't have anything in common besides the first 2 letters. It doesn't even have any connection to outer space. Its PS3 exclusivity is due to the game flopping and never getting its planned ports. What you just heard was a lie. The game was revealed for all platforms, then Ubisoft forced them to make the game exclusive. Classic, I know. So my point still stands, and I like the next joke, so I'm not going to cut anything out. I knew that instinctively as a kid when I got my Xbox 360 and pranced happily to it in order to play Haze, and just then I found out it's only on PlayStation. It was like the situation when you want Battlefield and your grandma buys you Battlestrike, only that I was the grandma and I wanted the shitty game of the two. Also, the developers explicitly said in a 2014 retrospective that they never aspired to be compared to Halo. By the way, this is from the first link on Google. And yet it's the most infamous Halo killer? Is this that famous misinformation the government hates so much? So the only tangible evidence is the marketing for Warhammer Fire Warrior, which I guess did kill Halo slowly and methodically like a cancer over the next 20 years. I'm very fascinated by Infernal, which is a third-person shooter by the way. Then why? Well, by comparison, if you look up the history of third-person shooters, even if you use a search engine other than Google, you might end up believing in the dead internet theory. So why the big dichotomy? Allow me to do a 2 minutes documentary about third-person shooters in order to attempt to explain it and contextualize my fascination with Infernal. Well, there are a few interesting ones, but they barely count because they either have strong elements from other genres or simply are other genres with some shooting sprinkled in. For comparison's sake, I don't think anyone thinks of Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines as an FPS. The most egregious example is Hitman, where you only play it as a shooter when your brain goes, let's get... So that leaves the only interesting pure third-person shooters being Max Payne, Psyops, and Control, I guess, which is Psyops made by the Max Payne guys, wow. I was going to say it's because their gimmicks enhance the gameplay due to good game design, but they are the only 3 with any gimmick at all. Max Payne also has some decent clones, but outside of these few exceptions, Dumnezeu cu mila. there are only two types of third-person shooters available, the ones made before 2006 and the ones made after. Before 2006, you can take a game from any year and compare it to a game from any further year, and the only improvements will be in the graphics department, sometimes, with the pacing and level design staying the same. After 2006, the same situation, but now with an innovation. The cover mechanics taken from Gears of War, aka Killswitch, aka Winback. In order for you to use this mechanic that was so beloved by developers that it was now used in RPGs, sandbox games, first-person shooters, and fucking Dead Space, the whole game design was changed. Your movement is slow, you can take less damage, but don't you think this incentivizes risk-taking because your health regenerates, so you better stay hidden, coward. Level design is streamlined to include a lot of chest-high objects close together, and enemies stay behind cover as well, especially at medium to high range. So most of your gunfights will be spent matching the time you raise your head out of cover with your enemies, and moving to a closer piece of cover in between fire exchanges. For the sake of modernity, they unwittingly sacrificed the future of a whole genre, because there was no Doom 2016 equivalent to save them. Maybe a few roguelikes, but that's it. So basically, I can play any FPS at any moment and enjoy myself, but with third-person shooters it's trickier. Pre-cover era ones are good mostly for nostalgia due to the fact that there aren't any modern indie boomer third-person shooters aside from this upcoming Max Payne-like. If it's from the cover era, it has to either have a gimmick like a boomerang or war crimes, have no cover mechanics at all, as rare as that happens, have a completely de-emphasized cover system like Vanquish, which grades you based on how little you stay in cover, or the most interesting case, have a de-emphasized cover system by mistake due to being released very early in the train's lifespan and not being up to speed with the whole destroying your freedom of movement thing. Two of my guilty pleasures are in this very category, Kane and Lynch Deadman and today's subject, Infernal. I stole this joke from Funhouse, but it's okay, drama will re-inject some life in their dead channel. I replayed them both recently, but I chose Infernal for personal reasons, which I'll explain in 30 seconds, but if you're this guy, I'll still put a timestamp. I saw a let's play of this game 13 years ago, and the German guy had this very dry sense of humor, like he was emitting these wild extrapolations, but his tone of voice was so flat and German that I genuinely felt like my brain aged prematurely seeing something this sophisticated, and I instantly wanted to copy him, but my voice wasn't there yet. 6 years later, I felt finally ready, so I was training by watching 8 hours of Germa.
I don't understand what the holdup is. Was it you? Was it you?
Penguin Zero.
I don't know why he still has his arm in the air. It's not like he's being sworn in a courtroom. It's unnecessary. He's just listening to a phone message. Oh, there we go. He's back at it, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the 21st century.
Clueless Gamer.
You know what this looks like? Exactly like my colonoscopy footage.
And obviously Funhouse. But when it came to actually doing it, without recording, I was having a 40 to 60 rate of funny to silence, and with the pressure of recording, the rate was catastrophic. I tried it on and off for 4 years, then I gave up during quarantine when I somehow became even lazier. And after 3 more years, streaming is popular, so people are actually okay with you being largely boring, but I have decided to go with scripted videos and stealing jumps from Hanos. So I came back to the game that planted the seed for one of my primary hobbies. As for the game itself, my fascination comes from its unique setting, where Heaven and Hell have their own private military corporations on Earth, and you switch sides at the beginning, playing as a demonic mercenary, so basically by combining an overused sci-fi setting, an overused religious setting, and contemporary earthly aesthetics, they obtain a vibe that feels fresh. And its aforementioned paradoxical design, on one hand it looks like a 2007 game, with the pretty effects, the Resident Evil camera and the cover system, but it plays more like a classic third-person shooter. Now, back to reality. The game wasn't well received, it flopped, and the company went from being the biggest in Poland to being bought by the then obscure studio CD Projekt. Should have stayed obscure, Witcher 1 is their only good game. Don't leave, I don't actually think that. Nowadays, no one talks about Infernal, there isn't a cult following like with other crappy games, and the few people that I saw talk about it either remember it negatively or play it out of nostalgia and regret it. It's time for me to inspect it thoroughly and see if this video will get me in line with the popular opinion, or it will try to redeem the game like other people did with their guilty pleasures. The first impression is indeed in line with the popular opinion. The game starts with stilted faces having an incomprehensible conversation, and then you fight tens of identical soldiers in a cramped space, and the worst thing of all is the lack of excitement, which mainly comes from you taking 1 or 2 damage points per hit. It's like you're fighting toddlers. Your superior can call you and tell you, "Infernal, if you get shot 90 more times you'll be in danger." Another joke stolen from Funhouse, I have no shame. And worst of all, now you can't watch their video because I spoiled the jokes. I'm like the devil. The devil appears and asks the protagonist to join him, and the protagonist gives a counter argument to all his offers, and at the end accepts because of a coin toss. Nice motivation. So now you're taking orders directly from the devil, unlike many games where the American government is the middleman. Finally, the game and the review can properly start, and don't worry, all my further jokes are made in-house. House. Graphics. So my first positive feelings about this game appeared when the pacing slowed down and I could actually enjoy the atmosphere, which was phenomenal in the first level. It reminded me heavily of Resident Evil 4's opening, and it's not just
The jacket!
it's the juxtaposition between a casually dressed but overpowered operative and a mysterious European village rendered in a very interesting way, which, just like the gameplay, is combining the stylized look of the PS2 era, made to compensate the low processing power, and the experiments in photorealism of the PS3 era. So the graphics have a degree of fullness to them that was lost when games started coming closer to photorealism, which is a point that we still haven't reached, and I don't think we ever will, as long as consoles cost 3 times less than a powerful PC, which recently also can't even run games. I think chasing photorealism instead of a unique art style is pointless, but let's manage to keep on track for the rest of the video. Interestingly, I think the game's graphics have even more than nostalgia on their side. They also have the fact that most of the games from that era used Unreal Engine, just like before and especially after. So while many PS3 era games aged like shit because of the plasticky HD graphics, this one fares better due to the in-house engine. Other great highlights are the Harbor level and the Arctic level with the Aurora Borealis, and this is where the caveat comes in. Resident Evil 4 went from village to castle to bioweapons lab in a very gradual and tightly paced manner in order to increment the cadence and atmosphere, and it can also be seen as a critique of industrialization throughout the centuries. This is how the everything is political people sound. I am one of those people, as you'll see in the story section, but sometimes it's better for your opinions to have more of a background role, if you catch my drift. So anyway, Infernal doesn't have this pleasant cadence of unraveling more and more grandiose man-made environments. It goes from traditional to an interesting mix of traditional and technological to 90% industrial environments with very little respite. It's a shame. Graphics alone could have given this game a better reputation if they would have been used on something interesting. Sound. On the music side, I also prefer older games because they went with a more in-your-face approach instead of the more minimalistic soundtracks of today, which when it hits, it's basically the missing link, which tricks your brain into thinking it's right there in the video game. The biggest example would be Deus Ex. But there's a reason this video uses Kane and Lynch music instead of Infernal. It doesn't really hit because it goes from repetitive metal riffs which fit Painkiller, but in a game with a more diverse buffet of action it gets boring, and the riffs just aren't catchy. On the other hand, the weapons are very bass heavy and make every shot feel real, which is something that not even 5 years later was solved with shooters, especially third person.
Did you guys hear that? You're fucking with us?
Story. I found it decently enjoyable, and even though the voice acting is very awkward, I feel that it adds to the fact that the cheesy dialogue is probably one of the most charming aspects of this game.
I'm your only option for survival.
Is that all you can offer?
Now get to that mortal's corpse and feed yourself on his soul.
Why would I ever want to do that?
I guess this place really suits a rat like you.
A lovely place for our little date.
Anything new on Wolf's activities, Lennox?
Not yet.
The last one was more personal. The way he pronounced "not yet" reminded me of my favorite video.
Get up and go to the bathroom.
Not yet. What the hell?
Go to the bathroom. You're shitting yourself.
Not yet. What the hell?
Go.
As for the plot itself, most of it is chasing magical objects that have no emotional weight on the player or even the protagonist. Like most games after all, MacGuffins for us intellectuals. Except that the game gets philosophical for like 45 seconds in the last half. Spoilers I guess, although come on. The biggest MacGuffin is an object that the angelic faction wants to use in order to transmit a signal and erase evil from the human heart, basically turning people into mindless drones. And although the extent to which the discussion goes is the cutscene at the beginning of this video, it genuinely made me ponder. Just like the epilogue of MGS2, it presents villains that want to change the existence as you know it, but they do not do it out of contempt for the human race and a desire to create suffering for their own pleasure, but rather due to the fact that their sequestered existence puts them in a position envisioning something that at the same time would add much to the lives of regular people, but also subtract all the essence of life as they know it, which begs the dilemma of does being in the thick of things make you prone to understanding what's best for you, or does being completely outside give you generous insight that could make a world of difference. This could be extrapolated to real life influential people as well. And then the game returns to chasing MacGuffins and never implements these big ideas. Frankly, Metal Gear Solid 2 didn't either. The sequel that Kojima never wanted to make did, and it shows in the shoddy execution, but at least it set that epilogue up for the whole game, even at a meta level. But still, not many games remind me of the genius of that game. Another one would be my Game of the Year 2022. Watch the video. Gameplay and just how the game feels in general. The game used to be called Diabolic License to Sin during early development, which gives me the following insights. First of all, the title was much more Googleable and just cooler in the 2000 edgy way. You had a 2000 edgy attire and you could actually drive your muscle car. Even after all these shitty vehicle sections, I still get excited like in my childhood when a linear game has won, so it's still a loss in my book. And it had a cover system before Gears of War was announced. And let me tell you, in case the intro did not make it clear already, it shows. The cover system is useless. When you get out of cover to shoot, you are exposed completely, and the blind fire option is so awkward to pull off and badly explained that I don't think anyone has ever used it. That also means that the enemies don't stoop to your level and don't humiliate themselves by using cover. And that's a good thing, because as I've already drilled into your head, it has the best of both worlds. On one hand, you have a health bar, so you can stay in the open for enough time to dispose of a few enemies, and both you and the opponents have a lot of mobility, so gunfights are dynamic, including the hilarious rolling, which makes you translucent. Also, killing an enemy mid-roll never gets old. And on the other hand, it has a lot of cover, which you will not use in the Gears of War sense, but it has a ton of flanking potential, especially in tandem with the teleportation that I'll describe soon. Even Max Payne 1 and 2 mostly have you enter a room facing all the enemies with very little flanking possibilities. So in terms of the dynamic of the gunfights, you could do a lot worse. So where does the bad reputation come from? Maybe it's the repetitiveness. After all, 80% of the enemies in one level are dudes with guns that look exactly the same. No, the game avoids being too repetitive by having actually decent pacing and level design. The stages always vary in terms of openness and verticality, and it has teleporting, flying, and heavy enemies in order to have you think actively about the level instead of just being set dressing. It also breaks up the monotony of combat often, with varying levels of success. While none of the boss fights are that good, at least they are over quickly and invite you to be even more mobile than before, and this one where you throw stakes at each other like peasants was actually fun. I also enjoyed the moments of no combat, which sometimes go for even 15 minutes. None of the puzzles are at a Silent Hill level, but at least they don't have your sidekick telling you the solution. All this talk about modern games being accessible for everybody, and yet they don't have the option to disable that, which I'm sure more than 50% of players would love. Back on track. This reminds me of the most subjective praise I can give this game. It has what I call the Half-Life pace. Watch my first video, this is the last warning. You are alone with no one pulling you on a string in the same location for 30 minutes to an hour, so you can take your time and enjoy the atmosphere. Many people found the powers to get awkward and even useless. Surely that must be the thing. Well, to varying degrees. First of all, the first power the devil gives you is taking more damage. It's only in the prologue that you are a tank, so I guess this game promotes Christian values after all. Well, it would have been one of the most boring games of all time if it stayed that way. Anyway, I'm going to rank the actual powers. The worst one is telekinesis. It's absolutely baffling how much wasted potential is there. Just like with the graphics, having good telekinesis would have instantly helped this game's reputation. It would have had a place alongside Psyops and Second Sight. Just look at this shit. It's like they tried to make it bad on purpose. This transcends competence. Not only do you move slowly and can't do anything else during its use, but the object or enemy doesn't instantly go where you want. In fact, it's just a hypothetical projection of where it will go when you'll actually use the power. So it has the drawbacks of carrying the thing without the benefit, which makes it useless during combat, where an enemy will keep shooting at you while you astrally project him. Here's the only time it has been useful. Then we have the Infernal shot. You right click to deal more damage. Useful at the beginning when you only have a few shurikens and a pistol, so it has an element of resource management next to just being more satisfying to use. But when the combat becomes machine gun heavy, it instantly depletes the mana just to kill an enemy or two faster. The best one is teleportation. Due to being limited to a few seconds, people thought it's just for puzzles, but let me tell you, no one stops you to use it during combat, and it gives the game a little more depth. In combination with the dynamic combat and good level design, simply being able to teleport anywhere once, twice, and at the end even thrice for a few seconds never gets old, and always gives you the feeling of having options. It more than compensates for the other two powers. Although I really wish you had more, or have the shurikens for more than the first level, or a fucking shotgun. What kind of game doesn't have a shotgun? Which reminds me, the game is not a hidden gem. All this sucking of its cock and describing its potential, and yet I have to admit I felt incredibly on and off about it, sometimes to the second. Like I would instantly go from having fun to deflating and agreeing with the majority opinion. And because I have such a fascination with this game, I have allowed myself to autistically investigate why, and all I have to tell you is this: please don't try this at home, you'll end up being unimpressed with most games you play. So after being deep in thought, I have arrived at the conclusion that the inconsistency of the game feel comes down to 4 factors. The first one is recoil. The recoil animation is very anemic, to the point that I only notice it when watching a video, and while playing, it feels like you grip the gun with the strength of a statue, and it heavily contrasts with the powerful firing sounds and the special effects of dust flying everywhere, and it gives your brain uncomfortable mixed feelings. Mixed feelings that are deepened by the enemy reactions. While they spaz out decently while they're alive, upon death they fall very unceremoniously and kill all the momentum. It doesn't help that they take 10 to 20% more hits than I feel would be satisfying, like they aren't bullet sponges, but the TTK still feels off. Also, the combat is completely hit scan. For anyone who doesn't know, hit scan is when the alignment between weapon, person and shooting prompt results in an instant hit. It works for the player and enemies as well. Max Payne is once again the most notable exception, where every bullet is an entity in the game and is modeled individually. Projectile-based combat will always be more satisfying than hit scan, but you can circumvent that a little with bullet tracers. Fear is a good example. So yeah, in the context of Infernal, hit scan weapons without tracers are furthering the disconnect between the satisfying elements of the combat and the lame ones. And here comes the finishing blow, the 4th power I did not talk about, which I think ruined the game for basically everyone. In order to get health and ammo, you have to consume enemies, so it means that after every gunfight you have to sit through this animation 5 to 10 times, which fucking kills the pacing with no mercy. This is how you know it comes from the devil, because it destroys all your good feelings. Believe it or not, it's not all bad, because it enables you to be very aggressive in combat, but I feel like we could have had a better alternative. Which brings me to the final point. Instead of a conclusion, I'll do something different. Because I'm probably this game's biggest fan, allow me to envision a better version of it, and the reason I'm doing it is that all these changes could be implemented in 1 to 6 months of development, or even by mods if it were possible. With these changes, Infernal would sit alongside other cult classics like Armed and Dangerous, Dark Watch Breakdown, and of course, Psyops the Mindgate Conspiracy title drop. It also has better controls than all of them, so yeah. First of all, a tweak to the consumption power, obviously. It seems that even in the first version the power was present in this form. It's torturous how they never thought to change it. A better version would be something like a demonic aura that consumes corpses and takes away a lot of mana. You could even use it in combat, so this could change the balancing. This way you could take even more damage and make the combat more intense. And if you take more damage, then the enemies could die faster as well to address the bullet sponge complaints. It's a win-win-win situation. Better telekinesis. You press a button, the object flies to you. You press it again, it flies to where you're looking, like every other game with telekinesis. Objects consume a low amount of mana, people a decent amount. I feel like this system would have taken less time to develop. Once again, I'm dumbfounded. The Infernal shot is almost good. I don't even mind the huge mana consumption for machine guns, but maybe add a bigger area of effect in order to scale to how useful it is with a pistol. The teleportation is basically perfect, so to make it perfecter, they could have maybe added a permanent one that takes away all your mana. Tweaks to the gunplay. Make the guns spaz out more, make the enemies spaz out more. Look at Resident Evil 4 for how much these simple things improve the experience. Allow the option for a point crosshair or laser or whatever. The less obstruction the better, and this is the most obstructive crosshair I have ever seen. And now we turned a 6 into a 9 with a few relatively simple tweaks. Now the game would be even more compelling with two things that would be more complicated to implement. First one would be dismemberment and gore. It's simple, every game with it is more fun, including Soldier of Fortune Payback, which went in my eyes from a 3 to a 6 due to dismemberment alone. Also, it's a game about the devil, come on. And finally, and may God forgive me for what I'm about to say, but it could benefit from an upgrade 3.